And I get to introduce Janet, who's very kindly stepping in as a speaker as well as hosting this webinar. Janet Fraser is a mother, poet, historian, and has been national convener of the Australian Home Birth Network, Joyous Birth, since 2004. She writes about feminism, history, human rights, birth, and parenting. Janet is on the management committee of the Feminist Legal Clinic and co-founded the New South Wales Women's Guild in 2019. She was a winner of the Eva Bacon Award in 2021, given in honour of the communist organiser Eva Bacon and awarded by IWD Brisbane Meanjin for her long commitment to women's liberation. Janet's book, Born Still, a Memoir of Grief, was published in 2020 by the Australian publishers Spinifex Press. She has been published in the Melbourne University Journal, Hecate, and has been published by the Hunter Writers Centre, Grieve Collection, and other journals. You can also catch her on Facebook and Twitter when she's not suspended.
That does happen a little bit. I'm going to talk about mother blaming, Munchausen syndrome by proxy, Meadows' law, and the recent trans kid phenomenon. Sir Samuel Roy Meadow, who in 1998 was knighted for his services to children's healthcare, is a retired paediatrician from the UK. Building on the work of endocrinologist hematologist Dr. Richard Asher, he took Asher's description of Munchausen syndrome from 1951 and expanded it into Munchausen syndrome by proxy. His 1977 published paper, Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy, The Hinterland of Child Abuse, has had a significant effect on women and their children worldwide ever since. Meadow went on to become a very influential expert witness in murder trials where mothers were convicted of murdering their children on his evidence, which became known as Meadows' Law. Meadows' Law states that 1, sudden infant death is a tragedy, 2 is suspicious, and 3 is murder, until proven otherwise. He also acted as an expert witness in family law matters and was instrumental in the removal of children from mothers and placement with fathers. Meadows' law was also invoked, though not by name, in the trial of Kathleen Folbig. She has recently been exonerated, and it is acknowledged that her 20-year imprisonment has been one of the worst miscarriages of justice in Australia. In this paper, I want to talk about both the fallacy, which is Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and the lie of Meadows' law and how they've been applied in the UK and Australia. And I want to lay this out in order to explain why it is that mother blaming and terms like munchy mum in criticism of medicalising children under the guise of transgender ideology is old misogyny in new terms. Asher and Meadow both wrote at times when the medical journal articles were of a very different tone from those of today. In fact, in 1955, Asher wrote an article titled, "Why Are Medical Journals So Dull?" His 1951 case histories of 2 women and 1 man are replete with asides, humorous in-jokes for doctors, and even the heads up that the anonymising might give clues to the patient's identities if the doctor's reading have encountered them. Asher's opinion of these people was that in order to gain attention or feel special, some individuals fabricate serious illnesses and repeatedly seek medical help. Baron Munchausen is a fictional German character. You may have seen the Terry Jones movie, which shows a number of the Baron's more famous escapades, such as being fired out of a cannon during the Turkish siege of Vienna. Asher felt that what he saw on the mental observation ward at the Central Middlesex Hospital involved fantastical stories by patients, hence the name Munchausen syndrome. Meadow took these observations and applied them to mothers who, in his view, were abusing their children by faking serious illnesses, leading to a lot of invasive testing, treatment, and hospitalisation for mystery illnesses. Meadow wrote a case study of 2 mothers whose children were admitted with significant but undiagnosed illnesses. This diagnosis of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, however, is not focused on the children, but on the doctor's suspicions of the mother's behaviours and motivations. The second case study he presented, for instance, alleged that a mother was somehow feeding her child extraordinary amounts of salt, leading to hypertrinemia, excessive amounts of salt in the blood. To test his theory, he force-fed the unwilling child 20 grams of salt, which did not raise his sodium levels to the levels seen via testing. Although Meadow said he did not know, therefore, how the mother was introducing salt to the child, he was convinced that she was somehow poisoning him. Sadly, the child later died. More recently, physicians reading this case study have raised the possibility that the child was actually suffering from diabetes insipidus, which is where the body loses too much fluid through urination, causing a significant risk of dangerous dehydration and a range of other conditions, including concentrating sodium in the body. While first noted in 1794, it is a rare condition affecting around 1 in 25,000 people, and some doctors may never see a case. Easier then to blame the child's mother. The supposed symptoms of Munchausen syndrome by proxy are nebulous and frequently involve doctors and other health professionals making value judgments about mothers. Other professionals took on the Meadow diagnosis in search of a disease, and the list of unsafe convictions, overturned convictions, and thousands of children removed into foster care in the UK makes for terrifying reading. These same beliefs were taken around the world, since the winds of misogyny blow always cold for women. In Kathleen Folbig's trial, the court declared Meadow's other mother-blaming mechanism, Meadow's Law, would not be entered into evidence. Instead, however, the prosecution introduced the essence of it without the name. His notorious and inaccurate statistic that more than one sudden infant death in a family had odds of 1 in 73 million was already being questioned by this time in England, and a few years later the General Medical Council would seek to have Meadow struck off, unsuccessfully in the end, as it turned out. So what do critics of Munchausen syndrome by proxy say? Dr. Helen Haywood-Brown has done some of the largest studies into false allegations of this syndrome and supports mothers in the legal system internationally who are battling against it. The women who've experienced this hellish ride sometimes call it diagnosis by immaculate perception, as a woman can have the label attached to her without a doctor ever laying eyes on her or her child. Mothers who are informed, have researched their child's condition, seek to be present in support of their child as much as possible, ask probing questions of medical staff who are or have been a nurse, or have sought second or even third opinions regarding a child's health, can be viewed with suspicion. Meadow and other doctors assume women exaggerate the pain their children are experiencing in the same way doctors assume women reporting their own pain are malingering attention seekers. The unreliable narrator of our own physical state then becomes the unreliable narrator of our child's state. This is not to deny that abuse of children happens, but it cannot be prevented by a psychiatric label being attached to a mother in the absence of evidence. Critics suggest that labelling criminal behaviours correctly, such as smothering or poisoning, rather than the amorphous mother-blaming Munchausen label, may be a better way to safeguard children. There are a number of ways this diagnosis can then play out in law, whether the government or private individuals take it further. Once a diagnosis of Munchausen syndrome by proxy has been made, child protection authorities can apply to the Children's Court in order to remove a child. The Children's Court of New South Wales Resource Handbook describes the process in this way. Care proceedings involve discrete, meaning confined, distinct and specialised principles, practices and procedures which have regard to the fundamental purpose, namely the safety, welfare and well-being of children in need of care and protection. The rules of evidence do not apply. Ding, red flag. The proceedings are non-adversarial and they are required to be conducted with as little formality and legal technicality and form as the circumstances permit. In practice, then, this means having a secret hearing among professionals who do not have to live up to the rigours of evidence law and who can, as formally as they choose, remove a child without needing to refer to the parents ever again. In family law, which is also governed by secrecy in courts internationally, Meadows' law and Munchausen syndrome by proxy have been and are used to remove children, some with complex medical needs, from caring mothers. There is no oversight and little possible redress for decisions in family law. Women cannot speak up publicly without risking contempt of court, and these decisions go unnoticed and unmentioned most of the time. Those women whose children have been removed by the state because they won't medicalise them have had this process used against them. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women know only too well the agony this process causes. In 2022, ABC's Background Briefing covered the stories of two women who experienced accusations of Munchausen syndrome by proxy some years prior. One woman, known as Alison, not her real name, was airlifted with her son to a major Sydney hospital, owing to life-threatening but unclear disease affecting him. She was later escorted from the hospital. The interview continues. Police went to court to get an AVO to protect her kids, not just the unwell son. Then in June 2017, almost 3 years after the helicopter to Westmead, things got even worse. Police arrested and charged her with a crime, alleging she'd threatened her son's life by poisoning him. If found guilty, she faced up to 10 years in jail. Another woman whose baby was in the same hospital had a similar experience. She was escorted from the hospital and her 9-month-old baby made a ward of the state. Because the woman's husband told police and child protection he did not think his wife was harming their baby, he was considered to be colluding with her and thus also an unfit parent. He was, however, allowed to keep their other children, which makes no sense if authorities truly believe him to also be dangerous. This was all decided by doctors at 2 hospitals without interviewing either parent. The baby was grown up to be 16 years old at the time of the Background Briefing episode. Both these mothers were eventually found not guilty in court, but the harm to them, their families, and their children is incalculable. Munchausen syndrome has now morphed into factitious disorder imposed on the self, and Munchausen syndrome by proxy is now factitious disorder imposed on others, enshrined in the latest Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders No. 5. As Hayward Brown notes, when critics point out the flaws in reasoning and uselessness of a diagnosis mostly used to harm children rather than protect them, doctors call the supposed disorder something else and re-entrench the idea. Mother blaming has always been a popular sport. Mothers perceived to be too little interested in their children's welfare, the "oh my God, she's on her phone" cries, or mothers perceived to be too interested in their children's welfare, the "oh my God, she must have Munchausen syndrome by proxy" cries, are mothering wrong. There is no yardstick for mothering correctly, and for many years I have said that the only good mother is a father. When we see depictions of trans kids in the media or on social media, we get the propaganda depiction of glowing kids and supportive mums. Once you talk to the parents who are having their children taken by the state for failing to medicalise their child, the landscape begins to look different. There are mothers who are suicidal over their child being medicalised against their will, or the mothers who have had their child medicalised by a vengeful ex-partner using this latest medical scam as a weapon in the family court. There are absolutely women who have embraced this cult and fervently sacrificed their children to its panoply of technology, homophobia, and misogyny. These women are praised by the medical establishment for their acceptance that the baby they grew in their womb was poorly grown, with a wrong body for their brain. These women, some of whom have been threatened with the obstetrician's dead baby card, are later threatened with the dead trans child card. Do you want a live son or a dead daughter? And have gone along with it, as many of us go along under duress. Women's socialisation to be kind, to accommodate, to believe men over women, to run terrified rather than stand and face these incursions into our spaces, is one of the greatest manipulations trans ideology has embraced. The fawn part of flight, fright, freeze, fawn has never been more apparent than in the hundreds of replies on social media when an autogynephilic man seeks validation. I have written and spoken before of the intense, crushing pressure on parents, particularly mothers, to capitulate to the genderists. Mothers know that a suicide attempt, successful or otherwise, will be sheeted home to them. Mothers know that the archetypal bad mother is only one goalpost shift away at all times. Whether it's ruining your child by having paid work outside the home or ruining your child by working inside the home, mothers know they will do it wrong. So many times we see the undeniable Hollywood fashion for trans children blamed on high-profile mothers seeking to enhance their status. The various fads for tiny dogs, overseas adoptions, or trans kids, these are the yo-yos of school life translated into real-world consequences and harm. But each of these kids has an invisible father somewhere there, unless he's more famous than the mother, in which case he might get equal billing. I'm not sure we measure anything particularly well, however, when we use Hollywood as a yardstick. I'm always struck by the rush to blame feminism, therefore women, for the times when patriarchy triumphs. It is, we are told, the fault of feminism and feminists that women in paid work outside the home are also slaves to the household maintenance in the home, not because we've socialised men to leave it all to women. It is the fault of feminism when women choose not to have children until later in life, not the fault of workplaces which invoke the motherhood penalty as they embrace the fatherhood award. And we all know that when a man kills another man, if that man is a trans-identifying man, it is the fault of TERFs, women, that another trans-identifying male has been killed. Women, we are told, are to blame for a genocide on trans-identifying people. While a genocide or outside world danger is a common cult belief, there is not one skerrick of evidence that trans-identifying people are being harmed en masse, let alone harmed en masse by women. The evidence that they are being harmed by authority figures and doctors is all around us, but unmentionable in the cult. And there is a particularly vitriolic form of denial exercised by some of the mothers of these medicalised children, because the house of cards on which they have staked their child's life is as unsteady as it appears, particularly in the wake of the UK CAS report. These women also know that mother blame is about to land on them, not on the children's father, and not the children's specialised medical providers who have dealt the dead trans child card. It doesn't matter how you slice it, blame comes home to roost in the hen house, never the rooster's perch. Just like some exited women from the sex trade are later free to say, I had to say the sex trade was fantastic while I was in it because the reality was too agonising to admit even to myself. I suspect there are a lot of mothers with trans kids who'd relate strongly to this. I'm not saying mothers never abuse children. I am saying that the stories told in patriarchy about evil mothers is not of our making. Each of us embodies the misogyny everyone is taught from birth. Our sex is the inescapable evidence that we are lesser, faulty, dirty, humans 2.0, and always at fault. Munchausen syndrome by proxy and Meadows' law are overt mother blame mechanisms, and despite being found to be simply untrue, continue to be exercised to the detriment of mothers and children. Trans activism, also promoted by medical experts, continues to be exercised to the detriment of mothers and their children. Mothers who embrace the cult are likely to lose their children to premature disease. Mothers who refuse the cult are held to blame by society for their failure to embrace the true identity of their children, and their punishment can be losing that child to the cult. We must, as a society, take mature measure of how these billionaire-led luxury beliefs have overtaken our institutions and harmed the vulnerable. But I will not stand by and see it sheeted home to feminists, to mothers, to women, as if patriarchy, fathers and men were gossiping over the back fence while we did our malicious worst. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Great
Thanks,
stuff.
Janet.
Beautiful, passionate speech and close to my heart in a defence of mothers.